When we encounter difficult people, a lot of times our first reaction is words. When we encounter someone who has a different idea than us, the very first thing that we have to use that's at our disposal are words. And those words mean something, right? As they come out, a sentence, and then that sentence from what was formed there creates an idea, and that idea then rests on the one that receives it. Things change. I'll change this one. It'll drop us the whole time. Cool. So, yeah, are we good? Boom. How about that? Now I'm going to have to take it out of my shirt. TV timeout. Alan, don't step on that. It's already broken, I think, but it is what it is. Let's move on. So words begin. They create this idea. Those words are then deposited into a hearer. That idea then has impact, and people respond to it, and people kind of gather what that idea was, and then they decide, hey, how much weight is this going to carry with me? How much is this going to impact me? How much is this going to direct who I am? Words matter. Now, sometimes, there are people that use words, and the words come out of their mouths, and it's just like in one ear and out the other. You're like, you know what? They just talk, They just talk, and none of that happens, But then all of a sudden, there are some times when words then make the next step, where it's not just words anymore. Where enough words have been exchanged, where ideas have been formed in one another, that you made a decision, you know what? No longer will words work for me to accomplish my goals, and so I've got to then resort to something else. And if you're the water boy, you just put Colonel Sanders on his rear end. That's what you do. That's what you do. I don't know if you've been there. Where words have just said, you know what, it just doesn't have enough weight anymore. There's not enough value. There's not enough authority here. And so I've got to resort to something else. Well, it's not something that's new with you or with me. And Lord knows I've got this issue from time to time. It's not something that's just, hey, a generational thing. It's not a millennial thing or a Generation Z thing or a boomer thing. It's been going on for a long time thing. In fact, it's been going on so long that the baby brother of Jesus writes about it in the Bible. He says, hey, let me give you some insight on how these words are taking effect in our world. And so over the next couple minutes, I just want to read through the baby brother of Jesus' words, specifically about words, right? So to give you a little bit of a setting, his name is James, and James writes a letter, and this letter is delivered to people who are spread out all over the place, people who are followers of Jesus, and they're spread out because of persecution, right? They're all over the place. And so James delivers this letter, and inside of it, he wants to have a conversation, and specifically, he has a big chunk that we're going to find in chapter 3 that talks about, he's going to use the word tongue or mouth, but he's really talking about words. We're going to pick it up in James chapter 3, verses 3 through 5. We'll put it on the screen if you don't have your Bible with you today. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. And so he spends a huge chunk of time here in the beginning of this passage where he says, hey, let me give you 3 illustrations for just how dangerous the tongue can be, right? He says, hey, it's a bit in the mouth of a horse. It's the rudder on a ship. It's a small spark that starts a forest fire. The forest fire, I don't know if you remember this phrase, but it says this was fairly popular, has been for about 5.5, 6, 7, now 7 decades. Remember, only you can prevent. Boom, they must have done a good job. How about that? You know what I'm saying? So that was Smokey the Bear, and that was 1947. Now, just a fun fact, this has nothing to do, it's not going to be any good transition. I just saw it, I read about it, and I wanted to give you the fun fact. So that was 1947 that phrase started. The campaign by Smokey the Bear actually started in 1944, except his phrase in 1944 was, Smokey says, care will prevent 9 out of 10 forest fires. And that went for 3 years, and nobody cared that care would prevent 9 out of 10 forest fires. So they had to come up with a better slogan. Clearly, they did a good job. Right now, 85% of forest fires are created by someone's human hand. So I guess they rounded up 85 to 9 and said 9 out of 10. But right now, the way Smokey does it, every single one of them can be prevented by you. Only you can prevent forest fires. That's just a fun fact. Second thing, right? So that's forest fires. Second thing, ship's rudder. It determines the direction, right? No matter how big a ship is, there's a rudder somewhere, right? Even if you're on a canoe, then you create the rudder with your paddle, right? I don't know if y'all ever did that, but I've done some canoeing, and it's fun. If you get to be at the back, you don't have to paddle as much, but you get to just do all these kind of things, you know what I'm saying? You create a rudder, and it tells the ship, hey, where are we going? No matter how big the ship is. In fact, the Titanic had a rudder. When it saw an iceberg, right? It was 900 feet away. That rudder had, though, set it on a course, on a path. It was too late. As it inched closer and closer, it wasn't inching, it was full head, steam ahead. They were trying to break a speed record. And as that rudder had already decided the path it was going to go on, when it saw danger, it was too late to correct it. It needed well more than 900 feet. Sure enough, there it was. In other words, once our mouths get going, sometimes they're hard to stop. The bit in the mouth of a horse. This is a common illustration that goes back all the way throughout the ancient world. It's been recorded in writings for over 2,400 years now. Plato, Sophocles, both used the bit of a horse or a bit in the mouth of a horse to talk about how the mouth could steer a direction of a life. When we think about bits and the horse's mouth, we're talking about control and restraint. Direction, and then whoa, right? Like, hey, hold on one second. And so the baby brother of Jesus, James, is attempting to create this idea that, hey, I want to put into your mind that your mouth has a little more power, even though it's tiny compared to everything else in your body. It has the opportunity and the ability, the power within it, to direct your entire course of your life. He continues, James 3:6. He says, the tongue is also a fire. So he's talking about forest fires. Consider what a great fire is set on blaze by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. James is giving us some insight into how this happened. In other words, this wasn't the original plan. Did you notice there as we read the passage? It says, it and is itself set on fire by hell. In other words, it didn't start on fire. When God created us, our tongue didn't have that nastiness to it. Our words didn't have this nastiness to them. But at some point, Satan has decided, hey, as I create my strategy to interact with a lost world and to keep them lost, what are the ways that I can do that? And he's identified in us, specifically our mouths, are his greatest tool to say, you know what, I can use your mouth to convince people that Jesus isn't who he says he is by the way you treat and say things to other people. And so James is not seeing this in 2020. James is seeing this in the first century, and he said, hey, we've got to get a hold on this. And number one, the way you get a hold on your mouth is first you identify that someone else is using it for their motives, for their behalf. And so it says that the mouth has been set on fire by hell, that Satan actually made an decision. That Satan made an intentional decision to do something different. This is really happening? Do I need to change to another one? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs down. So that's the idea. So Satan's made an intentional decision to make a change, to take something that God created and God gifted to us and use it for his purposes. I thought it's also interesting that he says that it sets the whole course of one's life on fire. That goes back to the Titanic thing. The rudder's just steering that ship. And though it's very small, it's determined the direction that it's going. Do we sit back and ever think about the power of our words? Ultimately, I want to set us up for the next 3 weeks as we walk through some of this. Conflict is inevitable. Conflict is coming. In fact, if you haven't had conflict in your life in a week or so, wait till Monday. I hate to do that to you, but it's coming. That's just the world we live in. And sometimes it's small conflict. Sometimes it's just itty-bitty things, like which way you put the toilet paper, right? Whether it goes under or over. Like sometimes it's just those small things. Sometimes it's really big things, like enormously large things. You can probably think right now, I've got a conflict in your family, right? You're thinking through it. I know this conflict. I know what's created. I know it's people being irresponsible, neglecting their responsibilities, abandoning someone, all those things. That creates conflict. Conflict's a part of what we're doing. And so for the next 3 weeks, we want to ask the question, what do we do before conflict? What do we do during conflict? And then how do we handle the aftermath of conflict? And so today, as we begin to say, hey, how do we handle conflict before it happens? I want to make the statement that maybe James is onto something, that if we had the ability to understand the power of our words, and understand exactly what kind of damage our mouth could do, that a lot of the conflict we could prevent by figuring out better words to say. That we could prevent by figuring out less words to say. That we could prevent by not saying any words sometimes. Simply giving some time for something to breathe. And for minds to begin to race. And problem solving to begin in our brains. James is onto something. He says it sets the entire course of one's life on fire. You see, your bank account can do one thing, your hands can get in the dirt, and they can serve. But if your mouth trashes everyone that you're serving, are you really serving them? If your mouth broadcasts every good deed that your resources do, are you honestly really being generous with what you have? Your words can betray you. In other words, you can go and do one thing and you think, I've created this path for me. I've created this path of generosity, and I'm going to walk on this path of generosity. But then your mouth goes and runs to something else about why you're doing this, and oh, look at me, and this is what I've done. And honestly, that path of generosity is no longer a path of generosity. It's a path of Hollywood. It's a path of look at me, let's put some lights on it. Can you light up the Starway right here? So your mouth has the ability, just what James is saying, to direct everything in your life. A rudder that maybe no one sees as much. But man, when you see, when it begins to do its work, you see the results of it. He keeps going with his warning in verse 7 and 8. It says, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. How about that? No human being can tame the tongue. It's unreal. No human being can tame the tongue. The idea hey, oh, how you doing? Come here often? Oh, where'd it go? You took my deep away. This was slimy, Lindsay. You been sweating? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I have no idea what I was about to say. That's all right. Oh, we got it. No human being can tame the tongue, right? Now, here's the cool thing about this word. When we're reading through James and we get to, hey, no human being can tame the tongue, that word tame is only used one other time in the New Testament. And it references, for those of you who have read through the book of Mark, you'll recognize the story. If not, I'll fill you in just briefly. In Mark chapter 5, there's a man who's demon-possessed, and he lives in the tombs in this town. and he ends up having a face-to-face confrontation with Jesus. But the way they describe the man who's demon-possessed is that he's kind of the whole neighborhood is aware of him, and he freaks them out. He screams in the middle of the night. He cuts himself with stones and clay pots, and he's naked. And he screams and runs around, and he's the guy you're like, hey, tell our kids don't go near that guy. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And so that's this neighborhood guy that's there. And so he has a confrontation with Jesus, and they describe him by saying that people in the neighborhood had attempted to bound him and keep him in chains, but there was no chains that could hold him. And so that very same, or tame him. So when they say, hey, they put this man in chains, but the demon possession inside of him allowed him to break out of every single chain they put him in. That's the same word that James is using here. Just in case you were thinking, well, give me a shot to tame it. He was like, no, let me just tell you. Let me use a word that really gives you some context that no matter what you do, no human being can tame the tongue. So let me finish reading verse 8. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. And it's like, goodness, James, you are laying it on. Like, what? Whose tongue did what to you? You know what I'm saying? Like, what has happened where you've seen so much damage happen in your life that you're just like, hey, it's an all-out assault on something God created. It's an all-out assault on the tongue that God said, hey, I'm going to give you words. I'm going to give you the ability to communicate. Adam, I want you to name the animals, right? Give them names, audible sounds. The way that we oftentimes show our affection to the people we care and love the most. And all of a sudden, James is like, let me tell you about what's happening with your mouth. All the way down to, it's full of deadly poison. In other words, it's over. The enemy has claimed our mouths as his instrument, and there is nothing we can do about it. That's no good. That's no good. And if we glance through this passage, then we walk away with an excuse, don't we? Tomorrow, when that conflict comes, and instead of squashing it with words, we just inflame it. When Colonel Sanders turns, makes fun of our mama, and all of a sudden we run out of words, when that begins to happen, we'll use this as an excuse. We'll say, well, no man, you heard Pastor yesterday, no man can tame the tongue, so why should I even try? I don't think James is giving us an excuse here, as much as he is presenting a reality that should create for us this idea, this question of how desperate should we be to put it in chains. If it's this restless evil full of deadly poison that no human being can tame, then does that create a sense of urgency inside of us? If it's something that's full of deadly poison, sets an entire forest on fire, if it's all of those things, can we create a sense of urgency to then say, well, if no human being can do something about it, what other option is there? I tend to like the way that he reasons this out. He says, let me paint to you the incredible picture of what Satan has done inside of us that comes out of our mouths. And let me just go ahead and tell you, you can't solve this problem on your own. But as the baby brother of Jesus, you know he has a solution. Because if you notice when we read through the passage, it says no human being can tame the tongue. In other words, James is leaving the door wide open that while you and I cannot create this opportunity to tame it or to put it in check or to put a bit in its mouth or to chill with the flame or to get the thing back on track with the rudder, while we don't have that opportunity with us, we do have someone who created it. And maybe the guy that created it has a little more insight on how to control it than we do. So James leaves this door open. In fact, James is simply echoing a refrain that's often heard in the New Testament. We see it with the church planter Paul, where he says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, The new creation has come. The old has gone. The new is here. In other words, he says, hey, as from a human being standpoint, on our own, when it's just us, we have a ton of human history that shows us that our words create wars, that our words create division, that our words tear each other apart. However, while we cannot figure out how to tame that ourselves and get a hold of it ourselves, it's unchainable. Jesus does offer us something brand new where he says, you know what? I'll make you a new creation. And so from the very beginning, God created us. Our tongue wasn't set on fire by hell in the beginning, but at the start, it was perfect. It was flawless. The relationship with our words and the world was exactly what God wanted it to be. And slowly the enemy worked in, and began to take it from us and use it for his own purposes. And Jesus comes, and James tells us about it. Hey, and you get the opportunity for Jesus to remake you, to begin taking you back to the way you should have been in the beginning. This new creation idea goes so much further than anything else, but we just want to concentrate it with our mouths. We have so a lot of our language is so habitual. It becomes who we are. And sometimes it becomes who we are because of the people we're around the most. And sometimes the people we're around the most, it's at our occupation where we work, and this is how they talk, and slowly, maybe we didn't begin talking like that, but now we're talking like that because that's how they talk, and I'm a part of what's happening here. And it's difficult for us to put a rein on it. There's this idea that James, Paul want us to know that we have limits as human beings. As men and women, we have limits. And sin has been introduced into our world, and it's created more limits for us. And so when we talk about Jesus offering the opportunity to conquer sin and death, man, when he conquers sin, he erases some of those limits that sin has put up in our life. He continues, in light of knowing all these things. Actually, let me back up just a little bit. Just before this, in chapter 3, this little diatribe of the tongue, James, in 2 chapters previous, had kind of set this whole conversation up. And I want to read that to you. It's James 1:26. It says, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues, deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Goodness. And so in this place, he says, hey, you can keep a rein on it, which is different than what he says 2 chapters later, that no human being can tame it. You can't put it in the chains. It'll just break out of it. But when he's talking to believers, he's saying, hey, but here's the deal. If you don't keep it in rein, if you don't keep it in check, if you don't put a rein on your tongue, then your religion, in other words, that path you created for yourself, it's worthless. Because he's already making the establishment that, yeah, no human being can tame the tongue, but with Jesus it's possible because of this new creation talk. And so he's backing up this idea. Hey, if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, your excuses are gone. Your excuses are gone. He says, begin to figure something out. I love the immediacy that he puts with this, because he's saying, hey, here's the deal. If you don't fix it, it changes the course of your life. That's a big problem. He continues in chapter 3. With the tongue we praise our Lord and our Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Man, this double-minded life, this one path for one thing and our mouth does another. This inconsistency. So often our mouth can betray our actions, can't it? At the end of the day, this is where we're talking about spiritual grit again. You'll see it's a recurring theme throughout the rest of this year. Because it's difficult to control your mouth, isn't it? especially in the heat of the moment, when things begin to kind of start and that conversation goes, and like if he says one more if she said she better, oh goodness, she's about to go there. Oh, she did it. Oh, she just did it. Like all that happens here. And then what comes out are not those words. It's just a bunch of 4-letter words. Just you put them together, and then it just makes sense to whoever's in the room, right? I don't do that. I'm saying you probably do that, Our mouths get us in so much trouble. So he said, hey, I want to bring some immediacy to this, and I also want to point out that not only do we not have an excuse if we're followers of Jesus, because he gives us the opportunity to be made into a new creation. He gives us that. But he also says, hey, be careful. What's that phrase? You kiss your mama with that mouth? You praise your God with that mouth? That's what James is attempting to say. Inconsistency. At the end of the day, inconsistency is simply spiritual immaturity. And that's okay. We are not a church that expects spiritually mature people to be birthed. Maturity takes some time. It takes a lot of baby steps and then some big boy steps that are sprinkled in along the way. And eventually, once you get walking and you begin running, and then all of a sudden you can begin sprinting and jumping and all those things, but that takes time. However, just because you have that where you can have, I'm just spiritually immature, I'm new at this Jesus thing. Even if that's the case, you don't use that as an excuse for why you're not doing what God has called you to do. You acknowledge that, hey, I'm new at this, but it's not acceptable to me to continue in this way. I'm not okay with the excuse, I'm new to Jesus. But here's the other truth. There's a lot of us that have been following Jesus for a long time, and we're still incredibly immature in this part of our life. Where our spiritual grit score and the way that we control our mouth is low. The threshold of our discipline on what comes out of our mouth is minuscule. But here's the truth. Conflict is inevitable. And so as a church, we have to identify, and you're going to hear this over and over again, with the election coming this year, conflict is coming. And so we need to figure out what we need to do before the conflict gets here. And it's my thought, it's our belief, that what we do with our words and our mouth oftentimes can keep conflict from getting here or being as severe as it often could be. If we simply have a rein on our tongue. If we simply have some control with what's coming out of our mouths. I love the immediacy James puts it here. He says, hey, I want you to know how serious this is. It sets the course of your entire life in one direction or another. That your tongue itself is set on fire by hell. It's an instrument that Satan uses. That it's full of deadly poison. It makes us wonder why sometimes we tell our kids things that we know aren't true. Like, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. It's not true, is it? Or, I'm rubber and you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. It's not true, is it? It's not true. But why can't it be true? Why can't it be true? It's because God doesn't want it to be true. God wants our words to carry weight. God wants our words to carry significance. In fact, Jesus tells us out of the overflow of our heart, the mouth speaks. And Jesus says, I want to own your heart, because the way they're going to see your heart oftentimes is the way that you're going to speak to them. And so Jesus said, hey, here's the deal. When I created you and Jesus was in on this creation, when Jesus was a part of this creation, he said, I'm going to give them this gift of the tongue, of the mouth, of words, because I'm going to put so much weight and significance on those words that it can change people's lives. You remember that person that sat you down for the very first time and said, hey, have you ever thought about doing this? I think you'd be great at it one day, and suddenly that became your dream. You remember that moment when you thought life was completely done, and then someone walks in out of nowhere just randomly and has the most encouraging thing to say, and you're like, I thought I was worthless. And you've been watching this the whole time. You remember those conversations that were forming to you, that changed the course of your life? And Jesus is saying, that's why they matter. But Satan has recognized, can I take one of the greatest gifts Jesus has given to you and use it now for my purpose? That's what he's done. And so we don't want to say, hey, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not let our words matter. You know what? Sticks and stones break my bones, but words are worthless. We just don't even need them. I mean, forget it. Say what you want to. I don't care. And Jesus is like, no, the baby's still in there. Just throw out the bathwater. It's the dirty stuff. He's saying, keep the words. James is attempting to communicate to us, hey, here's the deal. We've been given this incredible gift, and Satan has taken it. He's robbed it. He's hijacked it. And we've got to do something about it. But you can't do anything about it. You got to let Jesus. Because Jesus built it. So he knows the ins and out of how to retrain it and reform it and redirect it. I want you to try something for me. I'm going to reread that very first passage that the baby brother of Jesus writes. But instead of listening to it through this negative lens of it's a restless evil full of deadly poison, listen to it the way Jesus intended for us to use our words. Listen to it the way God would have said this to you in the very beginning before Satan got a hold of our tongue. I'll read it to you. You see, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the entire animal. Or ships, as an example. Although they're so large and they're driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is small, a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by only a small spark. It says, hey, if you take that gift that God has given you, you can direct your life anywhere you want it to go. He says, hey, would you be the spark that sets someone's life on fire? I ain't talking about burn it down. I'm talking about set it ablaze with a passion for what they ought to do in their life. Have one of those I see in you conversations that unleashes their potential. Could you set someone on fire this morning with your words? Could you recognize the weight that your words carry as they come out of your mouth? Could you say, Satan, this tongue does not belong to you anymore. And though you have used it and manipulated it for your own purposes, today, my spiritual immaturity in this particular area of my life will no longer be an excuse. It will be a starting point. And I'll begin to walk forward, inching my way towards spiritual maturity when it comes to how I use the words in my mouth as we move forward. That's what we need to do. That's what every single one of us need to do. Because here's the deal. Conflict is coming. If it ain't here already. And some of the greatest conflicts can be avoided or solved if we simply find a better way to use our words. You see, our words have the power to inspire the world around us. Our words have the power to change the world around us. Simply put, our words have power. Do you believe me? One small step for man. Some of you are picturing what it looked like on the TV, aren't you? You can see the black and white screen as the world changed. I have a dream. The backbone of one of the greatest changes in our country's history. A dream that started here, but out of the overflow of his heart, made it into our world. Love your neighbor as yourself. Incredibly powerful words. I forgive you. There's some of us here probably need to say that this week. Probably even more of us. I'm really sorry I hurt you. If you don't remember anything else today, the good words must go first. When we talk about conflict, when we talk about things that are headed our way, you already have the good words. The good words are already planted in you because God's already working in you. So you already possess them. And your good words must go first. Your good words must beat them to the punch. Your good words must be the initiator. Your good words must go first. Don't sit banking up all your good words in a satchel on your back, waiting for something negative to happen, and then say, you know what, now I'm going to put on my Mr. Encouragement, Mrs. Encouragement badge. There it is, and here's some good words. Don't wait around. Your good words must go first. This begins to put the tool to good work. Followers of Jesus in the room, you should be leaders on this. You should be leaders on this. We should be leaders on this. Our good words should be beating everyone out of the blocks. Our good words should be the first thing people are hearing. Our good words should be the things that people are remembering as they go to sleep at night because they were inspired and changed, encouraged, loved on. Our good words must go first. Jesus has given us such an incredible tool, but the enemy recognizes it. So let's do something about it. Everyone always. How do we handle conflict? Everyone always. Because we've got good words. And our good words must go first.